The rain had begun to drizzle in the evening, and by nightfall it had turned into a real downpour. Water flowed down the windows, washing out the neon lights of the city, turning them into murky spots on the asphalt. Narrow streets, grimy facades of old buildings, rare passers-by hurrying under umbrellas. All this was a familiar background for Ethan Carter. He had long since stopped noticing the beauty of the city. For him, these streets were a labyrinth in which it was easy to get lost and even easier to disappear. Ethan sat at the window of his sixth-floor apartment, peering out into the darkness where the city was visible through the glass. On the table in front of him was a cup of cold coffee, an ashtray full of cigarette butts, and a stack of old newspapers covered in his handwriting. On the wall in the corner of the room was a photograph. A young woman with kind eyes and a girl of about 8, both smiling and hugging each other. His wife and daughter, Emily and Grace. They were gone. He lost them 2 years ago when his article about corruption in the city government came out. First, there were the threats, calls at night, letters with no return address, a broken window. Then, the accident. The car Emily and Grace were riding in crashed into a truck on an empty highway. The police wrote it off as an accident, but Ethan knew it was revenge. He couldn't prove it, but he felt it in every cell. From then on, he lived on autopilot, worked, drank, smoked, barely slept. That night, as the rain pounded the glass, Ethan couldn't sleep again. He was going through old notes, trying to find something that would give him meaning. Then the doorbell rang, unexpectedly, sharply, like a gunshot. He looked at his watch, almost 2 in the morning. His heart started beating faster. In this city, no one came without warning, especially at night. Ethan walked slowly to the door, checked the peephole. There was no one on the landing, only darkness and the yellow light of the lamp. He opened the door and saw an envelope on the floor. The paper was thick, expensive, unmarked. On the front was his name, written in neat handwriting, Ethan Carter. He closed the door, returned to the table and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a black and white photograph. The photo was of himself, clearly taken from afar, through the editorial window. The sheet was covered with a short message. You think the past is forgotten, but it's looking at you. Stop before it's too late. Ethan clenched his fists. His heart pounded in his temples. He wasn't surprised by the threat. He'd gotten used to anonymous letters over the years, but this letter was different. There was a personal hatred in it, an almost intimate familiarity. Someone knew him too well. He sat down at his computer and began looking through old cases. Over the past 5 years, he had written dozens of articles about corruption, shady schemes, and the disappearance of people connected to city government. Almost every investigation ended in nothing. Witnesses disappeared, evidence vanished, cases were closed due to lack of evidence. But sometimes he managed to make a breach. Several officials went to jail, a couple of businessmen fled abroad. But the price was too high. Remembering the photograph, Ethan opened a desk drawer and pulled out a pistol. He didn't like guns, but after his family's death, he always kept one handy. In a city where enemies could be anyone, a neighbor, a co-worker, a random passerby, paranoia was becoming the norm. He dialed the number of his old friend, former police officer Jack Turner. He did not answer right away. His voice was hoarse, clearly awakened. Ethan, do you even know what time it is? I need your help, Jack. Threats again? This time it's something different. Someone is following me. A photo, a letter. I can't figure out who it is. Send me a photo. I'll check the databases, maybe something will pop up. Thank you, Ethan said briefly and hung up. He forwarded the photo and the message to Jack and then stared out the window again. The rain continued. In the reflection of the glass, he saw his face, tired with a shadow of stubble, with eyes in which fear had settled. Suddenly the phone rang. The number was hidden, Carter listening. "You don't listen, Ethan," came the distorted voice. "You don't know when to stop. Who are you? I am the one who was always there. You ruined my life. Now I will ruin yours." The line went dead. Ethan gripped the receiver so tightly his knuckles turned white. The voice was altered, but there was something painfully familiar about it. He stayed up until dawn, going over in his mind everyone he could cross. Colleagues, sources, former friends, enemies. With each new name on the list, the feeling of hopelessness grew. In this city, an enemy could hide behind any face. At dawn, he went outside. The rain had turned to a drizzle. Ethan walked through empty streets, past shop windows that reflected his silhouette and the neon lights. He felt like a ghost among ghosts, a man long gone. He was met at the editorial office by Samantha Lee, a young journalist, the only one who still believed in him. She looked at Etona with concern. "You don't look well," she said. "Thank you, Samantha. Did you want something? I heard you're being threatened again. Maybe you should take a vacation, leave town." "I can't," he replied. "If I leave, they will win." She nodded, looking down, her gaze sympathetic and tired. She too knew what it was, like when the truth became dangerous. Ethan spent the day at his computer, pulling up old files, contacting informants, trying to find any leads. That evening, Jack called him. "I checked the photo. The camera is an old type. They hardly use them anymore. But I found something interesting. The silhouette of a man is reflected in the glass opposite." I enlarged the image. The face is hidden by a hood, but there is a tattoo on the arm. "I think it is the same drawing that one of your old informants had. Remember Tom Blake?" Ethan recalled. Tom Blake, his source on the human trafficking case, disappeared after the article was published. He was said to have been found in a river, but his body was never identified. "Do you think he's alive?" "I don't know. But if so, you should be careful." Ethan hung up, feeling his insides tighten. If Tom was alive, then someone from the past had come back for him. In the evening, returning home, he noticed a shadow behind him. Someone was following him, but when Ethan turned around, the street was empty. He quickened his pace, his heart pounding in his throat. In the entrance, he almost ran up to his floor, and only there did he allow himself to exhale. The apartment was dark and quiet. Only the rain outside and the dim light of the street lamps. Ethan sat by the window, lit a cigarette, and looked for a long time at the city that had once been his home and was now a cage. He knew the enemy was close. The enemy knew his weaknesses, his fears, his past. And this enemy would not stop until it destroyed everything that was left of Ethan Carter. That night, he did not sleep. That night, for the first time in a long time, he felt real fear. Not for himself, but for the fact that the truth he was fighting for might turn against him. The newsroom smelled of old paper, coffee, and fatigue. Ethan Carter sat at his desk, sorting through old notebooks and faded photographs like an archaeologist excavating the ruins of his own life. There was no fear or anger inside him, only a viscous, lingering expectation, as if something important was about to happen but never did. He didn't know what he was waiting for, but he knew it would be a long wait. Outside the window, the city lived its own life. Someone was rushing to work, someone was returning home, someone was disappearing into the alleys, never to appear again. In this city, everyone was for themselves, and everyone was hiding something. An email with no subject or sender address was flashing on the computer screen. Inside was just one line. You've been digging around in the past for too long. Some doors are better left unopened. Eaton wasn't surprised. He'd received hundreds of messages like this over the years, threats, hints, warnings. But this one was special. It had arrived at his personal email, known only to his closest friends. That meant the enemy was somewhere nearby. He closed the letter and opened an old archive. Folders with notes, drafts, connection diagrams. Everything that had to do with his main investigations. Corruption in the mayor's office, disappearances, underground casinos, the murder of a witness in a case about the construction of a new interchange. He was looking for something common, a thread that would connect everything together. Suddenly, a dull thud rang out in the newsroom. Someone dropped a stack of files. Samantha Lee, his colleague, was picking up papers from the floor, cursing under her breath. She was the only one who had not yet forgotten how to believe that journalism can change anything. "You haven't slept again?" she asked without looking up. "And you?" Eaton replied, trying to smile. "I haven't slept in 3 years," Samantha sighed. "Listen, I have something for you." She handed him a thin envelope. There was no stamp or address on it, just his name, written in the same handwriting as on the note from the night before. "It was on my desk this morning," she said quietly. "I thought you should see it." Inside was an old photograph, a group of people in a darkened bar. In the foreground is a man in a leather jacket, his face partially hidden in shadow. On his arm is a tattoo, a snake wrapped around a dagger, the same symbol that Jack Turner found in the enlarged photo. On the back of the photo is the date, November 15th, 2017. That year, Eaton was working on a series of articles about missing persons, and that's when Tom Blake disappeared. "Did you remember something?" Samantha asked. "That's the old port bar," Eaton said slowly. "I was there once. It was a hangout for people who didn't want to be seen downtown. Maybe it's worth taking a look there." "Maybe," Eaton nodded. "But not now. First I want to figure out who else is in this photo." He zoomed in on the computer. In the far corner was the silhouette of a woman, short blonde hair, thin neck, hoop earrings. It could be Laura Bennett, the former City Hall employee who disappeared shortly after his story on the land scam was published. "I'll try to find her," Eaton said. "Be careful," Samantha said quietly. "Lately, everyone who knows anything either disappears or dies." Eaton nodded. He knew it better than anyone. In the evening, he went to the old port. The bar had hardly changed. The same peeling walls, cloudy mirrors, smell of cheap whiskey and cigarettes. Behind the counter stood the owner, a massive man with a thick beard and icy eyes. "Carter?" he asked, surprised, when Eaton walked in. "Long time no see." "These are the times," Eaton replied, sitting down at the bar. "Remember Tom Blake?" The bartender frowned. "Many years have passed. He was here a couple of times, then disappeared. They say he went south." "And Laura Bennett?" The bartender shrugged. "She disappeared too." Everyone disappears here if they know too much. Eaton felt a sense of unease building inside him. He glanced around. There were two men in the room, clearly not locals, and a woman in the corner staring at her phone. Is anyone else in this photo alive? The bartender thought. Maybe Joe Reeves. He comes in sometimes, but not often anymore. He's been more careful since he got beat up. Who beat him up? Nobody knows. Or doesn't want to know. Eaton finished his whiskey and went outside. The thought was pulsing in his head. Everyone connected to his investigations had disappeared or died. Someone was methodically cleaning up their tracks. Returning home, he found an envelope on the doorstep. Again, no stamp. Again, just his name. Inside was a clipping from an old newspaper and a note. "You're next. Stop." The newspaper article was about a fire in an abandoned warehouse 3 years ago that killed 3 homeless people, one of whom Eaton later discovered was his informant in a drug ring. The fire was ruled an accident, but Eaton knew it was a cleanup. He sat down at the table and began writing down the names of everyone who had helped him over the past 5 years. Almost everyone was dead or missing. Only Jack Turner and Samantha Lee remained. He called Jack. "I have a bad feeling," Eaton said. "Someone is still watching me, and not just me." "I'll check the cameras around your house," Jack promised, "and I'll talk to the guys at the department. Maybe something will come up." "Thank you." Eaton hung up and thought. If the enemy knew his address, knew where Samantha worked, then the leak was somewhere very close. Maybe even in the newsroom. That night he did not sleep. He went through old files, reread his articles, looked for coincidences. At some point it seemed to him that all this was a huge web, in the center of which was someone very patient and very vengeful. Samantha called first in the morning. "I found Laura Bennett," she said. "She's alive, but she won't talk on the phone. She's only willing to meet at night in the old park." "It could be a trap," Eaton said. "I know," Samantha replied, "but we have no choice." Eaton spent the day in anxious anticipation. He checked his mail. Another letter, this one with a photo of his daughter Grace, taken a week before the accident. On the back, the same handwriting, "You won't save anyone." He squeezed the photo so hard that the edge tore. Everything inside him tightened into a tight ball of pain and anger. In the evening, when the city began to fall asleep, Eaton and Samantha met at the entrance to the park. Laura arrived half an hour later, thin, with nervous movements in large dark glasses. "I can't go on for long," she whispered. "They're watching me." "Who?" Eaton asked. "I don't know, but it's one of yours, one of those who were once close." "Why did you disappear?" "Because I knew too much." Laura was shaking. "I saw Tom Blake meeting with a man from your editorial office. After that, Tom was never seen again." "Who was it?" Laura looked at Etona with fear. "Won't tell. If I tell, they'll find me." "They'll find you anyway," Eaton said quietly. "If you don't help us, they'll destroy everyone who's left." Laura hesitated, then said quickly, "Check out the archive from November 2017, it's all there." She disappeared into the darkness, dissolving between the trees. Samantha looked at Etona. "What are we going to do?" "Let's go to the editorial office. We won't sleep today." That night, in a darkened office, the two of them sifted through old archives. In a file from November 2017, Eaton found what he was looking for, a list of the staff who had worked on the corruption series. Among them were his name, Samantha's name, Jack Turner's name, and one he didn't immediately recognize, Mark Hudson. The former editor fired after the leak scandal. He was in that same group in the photo, Samantha whispered. So the enemy is one of ours. Someone who has been around all this time. Eaton felt a chill run down his spine. The labyrinth of lies was deeper than he had thought, and there seemed to be no way out. He looked at Samantha. There was fear in her eyes, the same fear that had settled in him. "We are going to the end," he said. "Until the end," she nodded. At that moment, the last streetlight went out outside the window. The city was plunged into darkness, and Eaton realized now they really were alone against everyone. The office was eerily quiet. The light from the monitors cast long, distorted shadows on the walls, and the night was thick and dark outside. Ethan Carter sat staring at the screen as an archive file slowly opened, the November 2017 employee list. His fingers shook as if from the cold, even though the room was stuffy. Samantha Lee stood by the door, pale and tense, listening to every rustle in the hallway. "Are you sure it's him?" she whispered. "Nobody just disappears," Eaton said, not looking up from the screen. Mark Hudson was too careful to just give up. If he's alive, if he's seeking revenge, it all fits. Samantha moved closer, her shadow falling on the table next to Eaton. She looked at the list of names as if they were a death sentence. "We worked side by side," she said quietly. "I never thought, nobody thought." Eaton interrupted. "That's the horror. The enemy is always closer than it seems." He remembered Mark once telling him, "The worst thing is not enemies, but friends who become enemies." They both laughed then, not suspecting how these words would turn into reality. Eaton closed the archive and thought. Fragments of the past came to mind. Late-night meetings in the editorial office, arguments over articles, joint investigations. Mark had always been in the shadows, but he knew everything. He was the one who collected rumors, who knew who to trust and who to be wary of. After the scandal with the information leak, Mark disappeared, and no one knew where he was now. "We need to find him," Eaton said, rising from his chair. "Before he finds us." Samantha nodded, but there was fear in her eyes. She knew they were on a knife edge now. The next few days dragged on in a delirium. Eaton and Samantha worked almost without sleep, raising old contacts, meeting former colleagues who were now afraid to even say hello on the street. The city seemed to shrink, to become cramped and suspicious. Every glance, every casual movement on the street seemed a threat. Eaton met Jack Turner in a basement bar on the outskirts of town. He was sitting at a table in the corner, glancing nervously at the door. "You've gotten yourself into a very bad situation," Jack said as Ethan sat down opposite him. "I've been in it for a long time," Eaton replied. "I need to know everything you remember about Mark." Jack fell silent, then pulled a crumpled piece of paper out of his pocket. "A week ago, I received a letter, unsigned. There was only one question. Do you trust Carter?" I didn't answer, but now I think I shouldn't have. "Do you think it was Mark?" "Who else?" "He was a master manipulator. He knew how to sow doubt." "Didn't you think there might be more than one?" Eaton thought about it. His insides were clenched with anxiety. If Mark had accomplices, if he wasn't acting alone, it wasn't personal. Revenge, it was something more. "I need his face," Eaton said. "I have to look into his eyes." Jack chuckled. Sometimes the worst thing is to see your enemy in the mirror. Back at home, Eaton stared at his reflection in the murky glass of the bathroom for a long time. His eyes were tired, shadows lingering beneath them. He ran a hand over his stubble, remembering how Emily always asked him to shave so as not to prick Grace when she hugged him before bed. Suddenly the doorbell rang. Ethan froze. His heart started beating faster. He picked up the gun, walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Samantha stood there soaking wet. "I can't be alone any longer," she said as Ethan opened the door. "I feel like I'm being followed." He let her in, poured her some strong tea. They sat in the kitchen, listening to the rain drumming on the windowsill. "I found something," Samantha said, taking an old flash drive out of her bag. "It's Mark's archive. I took it from the editorial safe. It's all there. Letters, notes, photos." They looked through the files. Among them were scans of threatening letters, photographs of editorial staff, recordings of conversations. In one of the audio files, Ethan recognized his own voice, a conversation with Mark about the article that ultimately cost his family their lives. "He was recording us," Ethan whispered, "the whole time." "He knew what we were looking for," Samantha added. "He knew how to put pressure on everyone." In that moment, Ethan realized Mark wasn't just an enemy. He was a shadow of the past, a man who knew their weaknesses, their fears, their dreams. He could be anyone hiding behind any face. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He went out onto the balcony and lit a cigarette. A shadow flashed down the alley. Ethan peered. The figure disappeared into the darkness. He returned to the room where Samantha was already asleep on the sofa and sat down by the window. In the reflection of the glass, he saw his face, and for a moment it seemed to him that someone else was looking at him. Jack's words kept running through my head. Sometimes the worst thing is to see your enemy in the mirror. He remembered Mark once saying, "You think you're fighting the system, but you're really fighting yourself." It had seemed like a joke then, but now it seemed like a death sentence. In the morning, Samantha woke him with a fresh newspaper. The front page was an article about the suicide of a former official who had figured in one of Ethan's old investigations. The article implied that the new wave of publications was the cause. Ethan felt his insides drop. It was a signal. The enemy was not just watching, he was acting. "We have to find Mark," he said, "before it's too late." "What if he's already nearby?" Samantha asked. Ethan didn't answer. He knew. The enemy is always closer than he seems, and sometimes his face is your own reflection. It was that special hour in the city when the streets were empty and the neon signs reflected in the puddles like the eyes of a dying animal. Ethan Carter felt it in his skin. The city was silent, listening to his footsteps, as if it were part of a conspiracy. He was not going home that night. He was going into the heart of the web Mark Hudson had been weaving for years. It all started with a short message that came to Samantha's phone. "If you want to know the truth, come alone. Old office on West Street, midnight." Ethan had no doubt it was a trap, but he had no choice. If he didn't show up, Mark would hunt Samantha or Jack. If he went, he might die. He chose to go. He walked without calling a taxi, without using the metro. Every step was thought out. Every glance was appraising. He was being watched. He felt it with his back, but he did not turn around. In this game, you couldn't show fear. The old office on West Street had been abandoned for years. Once bustling with life, now there was only dust, broken windows, and a damp smell. Ethan walked in through the back door just as he had done when he and Mark had spent the nights typing up issues, arguing, laughing, dreaming of honest journalism. It was dark inside. Only a dim lamp was burning at the end of the corridor. Ethan stepped forward, feeling the adrenaline squeeze his chest. There was a folder on the table under the lamp. Mark was standing next to it. He had changed. He had lost weight. His face had become haggard. His eyes had become cold, like a predator's. He held a pistol in his hand. "Hello, Ethan," Mark said, his voice calm, almost friendly. "Long time no see. You killed them?" Ethan asked. "All the people who helped me, all the people who knew too much." Mark chuckled. "I was just defending myself. You don't understand how this city works. You thought you could change the system. You just made it angry. Did you arrange Emily and Grace's deaths?" Ethan's voice shook, but he didn't look away. Mark hesitated for a second, then nodded. "I didn't want them to die. I just wanted you to shut up. But you don't know how to stop." Ethan felt something in his chest break. He stepped closer. "Why, Mark? Why did you become like this? Because there is no other way." Mark raised his voice. "First you write about corruption, then they bring you money, then threats, then people disappear. I just understood the rules of the game earlier. You didn't. You betrayed us all," Ethan said quietly. "You became the very thing we fought against." Mark laughed briefly and bitterly. "And you thought you'd stay clean. You took information from people who then disappeared. You used them like you used me." Ethan hung his head. There was truth in Mark's words, bitter as poison. He thought of all his informants, all the people who had disappeared, all the people he had failed to save. "I'm not a murderer," he said dully. "No." Mark came closer. "You're just the one who was looking the other way." At that moment there was a crash in the corridor. Someone had burst into the building. Mark raised his gun sharply, but Ethan jumped on him, knocking him down. A shot rang out. The bullet went into the ceiling. They rolled around on the floor, wrestling for the gun. Mark was stronger, but Ethan was angrier. At one point, he felt the butt of the gun cut into his palm. He wrenched the weapon free and pushed Mark away. Jack Turner appeared in the doorway with a split lip and a bloody hand. "That's it, Mark," he said. "The police are here. Your people have turned you in." Mark rose to his knees, breathing heavily. "You think this will change anything?" he hissed. "The city won't change. It will always eat people like us." Ethan looked at him, and in that moment he realized Mark was not an enemy, but a reflection, a shadow that he himself could become if he chose a different path. "I won't become you," Ethan said. Mark grinned and raised his hands in surrender. At that moment, police officers appeared in the hallway. They grabbed Mark and led him away. When it was over, Ethan walked outside. The rain had washed the blood from his hands, but not from his soul. Samantha was waiting for him on the corner, shivering. "You're alive," she said, relief in her voice. "For now, yes," Ethan replied. They walked through empty streets, and the city seemed even more alien than before. Mark's words echoed in Ethan's head. "You were looking the other way too." He knew the truth in this city always turns into pain, and the enemy is not only the one who stands in front of you, but also the one who looks at you from the mirror. That night, Ethan Carter realized the web of lies is torn only by blood, and no one emerges from it the same. The city was dead after the storm. Puddles on the pavement reflected neon signs, but no light made the world warmer. Ethan Carter walked through the empty streets, feeling the cold eating into his skin. The night before had brought no relief, only new heaviness. Mark was now in a cell, and the police were finally taking on cases they had previously preferred not to know about. But there was no victory. There was not even relief. Only weariness and emptiness. He walked aimlessly, just to keep moving. His head was filled with fragments of phrases, memories, faces, living and dead. He remembered Emily and Grace, their laughter, their warmth. He remembered how he once believed that the truth could save this city, that a word was stronger than a bullet. Now he knew. The truth is pain. It doesn't free you. It makes you vulnerable. It takes everything you love from you and leaves only itself. The office smelled of dust and old coffee. Samantha sat by the window looking out into the street, but she couldn't see anything. Eaton walked past her without saying a word. He sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, but his fingers wouldn't obey him. All he could do was stare at the blank screen, where his own face was reflected. The face of the enemy. Not Mark. Not the ones who had threatened him with letters. Not the officials or the police, his own. He thought about how it all began. About the first article, the first threat, the first lie he had turned a blind eye to for the sake of more material. He remembered how he had rejoiced at victories, how proud he had been that he was changing the world. But with each new line, with each new revelation, he had lost something important. Faith, friends, family, himself. Mark wasn't just an enemy. He was a warning. He was what Eaton could have become if he'd ever chosen a different path. If he'd allowed himself to justify the lies of survival. If he'd stopped believing that anything could change. That evening he went out onto the roof of the office. The city lay below, vast, indifferent, infinitely alien. The rain had long since stopped, but the air was damp and tired. Eaton lit a cigarette, looked at the lights, listened to the sirens wailing somewhere in the distance. He thought about what would happen next. Would he continue writing? Would he be able to believe in the power of words again? Or was it time to leave, to disappear, to become one of those who dissolved into the labyrinths of the city? He remembered Mark once saying, "Everyone in this town has a price. It's just a question of who's going to say it." Eaton didn't know if he had a price, but he knew he couldn't live any other way now. He would always look for an enemy, and he would always find one, in other people's faces, in reflections, in himself. When he returned to the office, Samantha had already left. There was a note on her desk. "We are all a little bit each other's enemies, but someone has to remain human." Eaton smiled for the first time in months. He knew he wouldn't be a hero, he wouldn't be a winner, but he would still be a man, even if the city didn't notice. He turned off the light, stepped outside, and disappeared into the night. The city awaited new stories, new enemies, new victims, but now Eaton Carter knew what it was like to see the face of an enemy and not turn away.